Good evening and welcome, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you today as members of the network of consulting professionals and guests. When I look at the NCP logo, there are three words: support, strengthen and succeed. Now, I'm sure that those words resonate with each of us, but I find them especially relevant to what I do in my business and to what I want to talk to you about today. Because like many of you, my whole business is about helping improve other businesses, to support them with the knowledge that they can use to strengthen their organisation and give them a stepped improvement in performance so they can succeed sustainably. There's another S word. And we do this quite differently to that commonly tried. And I want to share some of those insights with you today. We only have 50 minutes, so I'm going to focus on one theme, that of role clarity. And I use the term theme quite deliberately, because it covers far more than the terminology would suggest. But as you will see, it is a starting point to organisational improvement. You see, very early in my career, before the first white hair ever showed on my head, I was promoted from a trade worker in electronics to managing a team of supervisors who each had their own teams to supervise in widely dispersed geographic areas. I now realise just how ill-prepared I was for this challenge, but being young and enthusiastic, that was never going to stop me. There was an employee in one of my supervisors' teams, let's call him Tom, who was a poor worker, always doing the bare minimum, and sometimes not even that. He was not intelligent, but he was street smart. And the common view with just about everyone, including his co-workers, was that he should be fired. But no one had yet found the right opportunity, until one day his supervisor advised me of an incident involving him that could be the trigger. So after gathering sufficient evidence, the three of us met in the field office the next morning, and long story short, he was told his services were no longer needed, effective immediately. Well, so far so good. But back in my office that afternoon, I was called by the very same supervisor who told me that he and three of his team were now very concerned on retribution from Tom. And on further questioning, I then discovered that Tom had been pushing drugs, and a whole lot of other very negative things surfaced. Well, I initiated a police guard on their houses until the threat diminished, and a few days later, I also found that Tom had initiated an unfair dismissal claim. So I spent a week gathering more evidence, involving interviews with the whole team, which uncovered even more disturbing news. I also discovered from my lawyer, and to my chagrin, that I could not use any of this other information to support the dismissal because it had never been raised with Tom. Fortunately, the unfair dismissal claim was thrown out anyway. Now, this episode was not the start that I was expecting or indeed wanted in my career as a new leader. However, it was probably the most influential and beneficial incident in my entire career, one that changed my leadership approach entirely. This incident highlighted the ineffectual leadership of that supervisor, but it also happened under my watch. I was accountable. And I realised the systems and processes I had in place were manifestly inadequate. Things did change quickly after that, but that was a kickstart for me on a journey of understanding, starting with the importance of clarifying roles and expectations. So with the context of that experience, I want you to think of your workplace or one of your clients, or one that you have previously worked for. Have you done that? Now, I want you to imagine what it would be like if everyone in that workplace knew their roles and worked and behaved professionally, where every person in roles from entry to executive level was respected, listened to and supported, and there was little to no gossiping or politicking, where production was efficient. People took pride in their work. The company's reputation was excellent and everyone was positive, engaged and motivated. Now tell me in the chat box, In a couple of words, what would working in such a place mean to you? How would that impact you? At work, at home, just in general? I'll give you a few seconds to write in the chat box. What would that feel like to you? How would it feel like to other people around you? Would that be an organisation or a business that you would happily talk positively about to your friends, to your peers? I see a few results coming in here now. Quentin says motivating, energised from Wayne, harmonious from Grant. Pam says clarity gives people certainty and confidence. It's a solid foundation for positivity. We've got comments like engaged, fun, feel proud of being part of it, says Francis. John says utopia. It'd be a happy place to work. Productive in capital letters, says John. And Kirstine says positive and encouraging. Yes, that would be great. Now I'm going to swap this around and I want you to tell me what you think is the biggest impediment to achieving that. Again, use the chat box. What are the key issues existing that are preventing that ideal workplace? The things that keep you awake at night. Again, in just a few words, what are the things you would see or feel or experience in workplaces that are not ideal? What are some of the indicators you may have walked into in one of your clients' businesses that was not ideal? Yes, Steve says poor processes, like silos, says Will. Oh, and also David. Quentin says crap leadership. Pam says people don't know how to measure what they want. They can't say it, but feel it. Wayne says poor communication, lack of trust. Miscommunication, says Kevin. And Hugh, mixed messages from leaders. Toxic culture, from Quentin. Yes, these are pretty consistent with what we experience also. Here are some of the typical symptoms that we often see in workplaces. And like a spider's web, they are often interdependent. If you see a symptom in one area, then you can confidently predict the likelihood of a different but related symptom appearing elsewhere. Can you relate to any of these? They're all pretty typical and many commonly found in most workplaces. The major reason why companies have these ongoing problems is ignorance. We call it institutional ignorance. And I don't mean that disparagingly. I mean they don't know what it is that they don't yet know about what causes such problems and how to fix them. And so instead, much of the negative issues become justified and normalised. It's the same in every workplace sort of thing. Or we are no worse than blah, blah, blah. Didn't we recently hear our Prime Minister report that in defence of sexual harassment claims, that a journalist's workplace was no different from his own at Parliament House? And therefore, the journalist's workplace also probably has sexual harassment, so don't target me sort of thing. How's that for normalising a serious situation? That's how prevalent this is, this lack of cause and effect knowledge. Well, just because the issues you raised are common does not mean they have to continue. And that's where I'm going to here to talk about today. How you can achieve what people might view as a utopian work environment, but it is achievable to get from wherever you currently are to a desired position. And I'm going to tell you the starting point of what you must do, how you must do it, and why you need to do it this way. But before I do, let me just put some context around this. I am Garth, the CEO of Our Workplace. And let me tell you right up front, I am not one of the global organisational specialists or an internationally recognised business troubleshooter. That accolade goes to others in this group. But I have had considerable C-suite experience, having led businesses with up to 300 people and up to $70 million revenues, right through to very small companies where I have had to be the multi-skilled, manage everything person. And I have used the principles and learnings in the Our Workplace program with great success. So I know it works. And today, over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you just a few insights and perspectives from global specialists and organisational troubleshooters. I will cover why roles are part of the organisation's architecture, what happens when roles are meshed with human attributes, why operational position descriptions will de-stress your company and greatly reduce risk and wasted money, and also what you can do to create true role clarity in your organisation. So let's start with how roles or jobs or positions are part of the organisation's architecture. A position description is most commonly used to describe what is expected of each role, and that PD belongs to the organisation. And this is important because it should never be written around an individual's personal traits or personality. Let's begin with a basic premise. Jobs exist for a reason, and that reason is not to give people employment. At some point in time, the role was required by the organisation, and they were prepared to pay a wage, give entitlements, ongoing employment, training, and so on, in exchange for certain work outcomes. And that involves working to a certain quality standard and in the way a company requires. And the company requires certain ways of interacting along the way. This is the concept of exchange on which the contract of employment is based. To the degree that an employee is not keeping up their end of this relationship every day is the degree that they are not meeting their end of the employment bargain. But if a company does not do what they are supposed to do, then they are not holding up their end. And that begins with not making what they need and want from a role absolutely clear to incumbents. We commonly see vague responsibility statements included in a position description, or onerous statements, which is the equivalent of solving world peace, or not clarifying what is required of the technical side of the role, and separately, what is required of people as staff members of a company. More about that later. These are some of the ways employees start roles with limited understanding of what is expected of them. Now, I'm going to talk about duties versus responsibilities in PDs. But before we go any further, who has seen in position descriptions the term "and other duties as required"? Just give me a yes or no in the chat box. Or it could be "other duties as directed" or something to that effect. Just give me a yes or a no. Oh, I see we're getting plenty of yeses all the way through. Yes, yes, yep, yes, yes. So here we have a no from Francois, but more yeses, loads of them. So it's pretty common. And that's a common mistake we often see in PDs. The inclusion of duties or a catch-all statement such as that dreaded "other duties as required," neither of these should ever be included for very good reasons. They will cause grief and extra work at some later time, and they will introduce risk, particularly if you ever have to front up to the Fair Work Commission. Including the statement "other duties as required" will significantly weaken your position in an unfair dismissal claim if you were ever to have one. So leaders still want a catch-all phrase in case there is something that comes up that they had not thought about. Follow lawful instructions or something similar covers this area without creating a loophole that exposes you to risk. I haven't got the time to detail these nuances now, other than to say duties explain a responsibility or how a responsibility can be performed. How we do something changes far more regularly than what needs to be done. Duties allow for agility and innovation, but that will not change the responsibility. So keep duties out of PDs if you don't want to keep updating them or if you don't want to stifle innovation. For example, people will always need to know and adhere to road rules when driving a car. That is an example of a responsibility. How and when they apply particular road rules, which is a duty, and the road rules themselves can and do change. Now, I can go into just about any workplace and the executives will probably tell me they have a position description for every role. But when I ask individual employees, there are many who are not sure where it is or exactly what's included in it. They may have a general idea, but when asked for details, they will be vague or state duties they do. Almost invariably, they will not know the purpose of their role. Have you experienced that? How many people here have experience with or have witnessed staff who think their PDs are next to useless? Just something to put in the drawer and never looked at again until the same time next year, until their leader brings it out for the annual review, if they even do that. Just put another yes or no in the chat box. People may have spent a lot of time writing them, but unless they are useful to the leader and to the incumbent, they will just be put in the drawer. I see the yeses flooding in again. Cam says PDs are often only used when recruiting, and that's it. Yeah, a lot more yeses here. Well, you are not alone. Most PDs aren't worth the paper that they are written on. And yet, these are some of the most important documents an organisation will ever have. Let's look at that further. Why are PDs important? Position description should clearly describe what is expected of the incumbent in that role. At the risk of offending your intelligence with too much simplification, how on earth can leaders lead effectively in an organisation if they are not clear on what their role is or the role of their staff? How can those leaders be expected to performance manage their staff to produce high quality standards of work when they don't have clarity on what they are meant to produce? When they are not clear on the purpose of each role? Leadership is about influencing change, to correct non-optimum situations, or to engage with the staff, to motivate them to accept change and take their organisation or their department or section to a new standard of exceptional service. How can they do this when they are not clear themselves about what is expected of everyone? How can they discipline people for not meeting an expected standard when that standard is not made clear? Or to reward people when they have met this unclear standard? These issues cause mistrust, claims of bias, unfair treatment, them and us groups or cliques, and so on. And goodbye to motivation and engagement of employees when all this is happening. Now, lack of role clarity is reported as the single biggest workplace stressor. It's like a spider's web that branches out and leads to, or certainly is a contributor to, so many of the commonly found workplace problems. We have identified 180 of the most commonly reported problems that executives, leaders, and staff face daily in their workplace. And every one of them has its underlying cause connected with or linked in some way with role clarity. Defining with clarity the work expectation has nothing to do with the personality or the particular traits a person has who is employed in that role. When you review a PD, one of the early red flag warning signs occurs when roles are described in terms of human characteristics. Now, this is okay for recruitment, but it is not okay for clarifying roles. I will talk more on that later. Problems are only made worse when roles are meshed with human attributes. All that really matters for role clarity is whether they are performing their job to the required standard on both sides of their role. So what do I mean by that? I put it to you that there are two sides to any organisation, whether that be a private or a public entity, a huge corporate or a small company, a not-for-profit, a government department, school or other education provider. And likewise, there are two sides to any role. One side is what we call production, the goods or services that are produced. Australian companies are generally pretty good at this side, this technical side. The other side is what we call organisation, the side that enables production to occur efficiently. This can also be called the team member side of a role. And this side is about the people and the systems and the processes under which they operate. And these two sides of an organisation need to be in balance, else there will be problems. And each has separate responsibilities, a point I will get to later. So when it's not in balance, when the focus is more on organisation and production is given a lower importance, we introduce problems. We create a bureaucracy where the focus is on process rather than delivering products or services. That initiates a lack of production, loss of sales, so we get financial loss, our delivery times slip and we cannot deliver on promises, we get loss of reputation, and it all becomes a downward spiral. It's pretty obvious. But what we find is the focus is generally the other way around. The focus is on production and not enough focus on the organisational side. And when that happens, we become too disorganised to operate efficiently or effectively. We tend to operate at the extremes of risk, where we take unwarranted risks because there is a lack of control systems, or when wrapped on the knuckle several times, we flip to risk aversion. Our focus turns inward. It's all about producing. This creates overwork and feelings of overwhelm. We see less staff engagement with increased employee stress and emotional displays, including bullying, harassment, cliques. In fact, those 180 most commonly reported problems have their roots in the organisation or team member side. So we need to get organised, but not like Matthews here. We need to get the appropriate balance between organisation and production. We need to ensure that the organisational side is actually supporting and enhancing production, with everything in alignment, running smoothly. So when we come to creating role clarity with position descriptions, we need that balance between the production or technical side of the role and the organisational or team member side of the role. And this is another key area that is commonly not well done. We need a paradigm shift in our thinking, in our approach to role clarity. So how should roles be clarified? Well, role clarity and how it is documented in a position description should include 7 key areas or sections. There are many other things needed as well, which we don't have time to go into today. But like most things, it's complex until you know how. We have a comprehensive online learning program all about role clarity, and another even larger one, which follows on from that in how you can implement role clarity in your organisation. So today I can only touch on a few things. PDs are not just for the incumbent. They are also used by the wider organisation and sometimes by external stakeholders. Think, for example, by HR or Learning and Development, by the CEO, by the Finance Department, even the Fair Work Commission. It will be one of the first things they ask for. So I will focus on the 7 things that are absolute must-haves. The first is the header block, which is often maligned but holds a lot of valuable information in a summarised form, and which we can use by a wide number of people in the organisation in a wide range of activities. A PD needs to state the purpose of the role, a high-level statement of why the role exists. If you were to ask any employee in any company what is the purpose of their role, they would generally struggle to explain this. A PD needs an explanation of what the role needs to produce. We call this an end product. That will be the physical evidence that the purpose is being achieved. A PD needs tangible metrics, which will be used to measure production. And by production, I mean the goods or services that must be produced in that role. This must align directly to the responsibilities and be within the role's authority and control. The number of times we see KPIs in PDs which are dependent on other people's performance in order to achieve them, and yet that person has no authority to control the performance or lack of performance of that other person. It's not hard to appreciate how stress-inducing that can be. A PD needs clearly defined responsibilities, and these need to cover the technical side and the organisational side, split out separately. When you do this, you give clarity that there are different expectations for either side, and leaders can better performance manage against those clearly defined expectations. Career progression can be aligned to the strengths demonstrated for either side of the role. Dependent on the role, you may include sub-responsibilities under the key responsibility headings. And as the name suggests, these statements need to define what you are actually responsible for. And that's not the equivalent of bringing world peace. Those responsibilities must be within the control of the person filling that role. And the final must-have of any PD is the competencies required to achieve the responsibilities. And we suggest that these should be listed after each key responsibility. And such statements of competencies are essential for recruitment, for performance management, for training and development, and more. We occasionally hear of people who claim that such detailed PDs would not allow innovation. In fact, it is the exact opposite. Such clearly defined responsibilities allow and encourage innovation within the parameters that the organisation requires. It becomes safe for an employee to be innovative because they now understand the boundaries. The most innovative companies in the world, companies like Apple and Google, do precisely this. Innovation is wasted if it is not aligned to that organisation's purpose. Now, developing PDs is an iterative process during development. But once they are completed to the standard that gives clarity of role, they should almost never need changing, unless that role has changed under a restructure or similar. The scope of work in any role is about what the organisation needs to have produced. And this must be in alignment to the organisation's purpose, and in turn to the division, the department, and the section or team in which that position sits. So you can see that the same linkage from purpose to end products at every level of the organisation. This starts to get into organisational design, which is outside the scope of this presentation, but it is aligned to the third phase of our program on collection of intelligent information in an organisation, which we call metrics. You see, an organisation and its people will generally go off track a bit by bit, but unless you have a benchmark against which to judge, you will not know. And that requires measurement of performance against the required criteria. So first you describe what the organisation actually needs, then you recruit against that requirement. This is where personal traits may come in. A good ad for recruitment will provide information to cull down the likely number of responses. You may want a certain qualification or certification or experience level. You may want a certain fit within the organisation's culture or demographic or whatever. But personal traits have no place in role clarity. PDs form the benchmark for the organisation, and when correctly designed, they form the foundation block of so many other organisational and operational activities, which are all interrelated, just like that spider's web. Let's look at a few of these. One is performance management. An effective position description clearly defines what the organisation requires of a role, regardless of who is holding the position at the time. From the employee's perspective, a good PD also protects individuals. It keeps them on track. It gives them certainty on what is expected of them. It certainly shows up the individual who is not meeting those performance expectations, which is often why certain employees will push back and try to white ant an operational PD implementation project. And if you experience that, it's worth taking a closer look at that individual or team and their leader. But a warning here, they could also be just concerned on what is the impact to their job or security, which is why good communication is vital whenever PDs are being reviewed or changed. And because it is fair on both parties, it gives a solid structure for a supervisor to performance manage against. And it forces a fairness in treatment within that relationship. It enables performance to be measured against the detailed measurable criteria that is within the control of the employee. It gives the supervisor a robust structure for them to manage their own responsibilities in managing the performance and behaviour of others. Without this clarity, how is it possible for a supervisor to manage the performance of others fairly when there is ambiguity in these expectations? And similarly with the annual appraisals. As a follow-on from day-to-day performance management, an operational PD sets up the annual performance appraisal to be completed fairly, enabling the performance review to be based on a judgment of fact, rather than hearsay or driven by personalities or biases. And this leads to fairness in the delivery of any reward or discipline to the employee, which is an area that is commonly affected by personality or bias. And when this happens, it breeds distrust. The separation of responsibilities into the technical side and the organisational team member side provides clarity on strengths and weaknesses on both sides of the role and enables more productive discussion and direction to promote career pathways. Both these sides require different skill sets, and just because a person may be good technically does not mean they are also good at the organisational team member side of their role. Similarly with governance. An effective PD incorporates internal and external governance requirements so that compliance automatically occurs rather than being a separate issue. It has specified inbuilt compliances to awards to the NES, that's the National Employment Scheme, and any ratified enterprise agreement. It complies with the standards imposed by the Fair Work Commission. So it is building in protection and risk mitigation for the organisation. Operational position descriptions create clarity on just about everything the organisation must achieve through its people. It impacts just about every activity that happens. To the degree that there is role ambiguity is the degree companies are carrying risk and losing money in internalisation, inefficiencies, duplicated work, nuisance factor work, and much more. As I said earlier, lack of role clarity has been reported as the single biggest factor that causes stress in the workplace. Its effect branches out like that spider web and impacts so many areas. There is a continuing cost of doing nothing. In a large Australian workplace survey, the People at Work project, which is a collaboration between two universities, Safe Work Australia and the equivalent state departments in the eastern states, it included Comcare and Beyond Blue. And they reported the least prevalent job demand was role ambiguity, with 81% of the overall sample reporting low levels of clarity. They went on to say, and many other credible bodies agree, that lack of clarity of an individual's role is a major stress factor for employees and a cause of disengagement. Now, the interesting thing here is that, as they also conclude, absenteeism and turnover are reliable indicators of stress, disengagement, and dissatisfaction in organisations. So if you experience any of these indicators, the root cause of them starts in role clarity, as does many other poor performance indicators. The Centre for International Economics state that Australian businesses are losing $34 billion each year through lost productivity due to presenteeism, where presenteeism is a concept that describes people being present at work but not productive, in other words, disengaged. This is supported by Medibank Private, where they stated the direct costs alone to Australian employees due to stress-related presenteeism and absenteeism was over $10 billion each year. And these direct costs are a conservative figure because it does not include run-on costs such as those associated with recruitment and training of new employees. A 2013 report by Safe Work Australia stated that workers' compensation figures for stress-related absenteeism and presenteeism were causing 92 million working days lost across Australia each year. They also said that poorly defined or conflicted roles is a critical stressor for workers. Now, these costs are representative on what is being reported globally, so we are not alone. Effectory is Europe's leading provider of employee feedback solutions, supporting more than 1,000 organisations in 70 countries. They state employees with high role clarity report high levels of effectiveness, high levels of intention to stay, and high levels of productivity, all above 80%, and 75% more engaged with leadership. The Work Institute, in their 2017 retention report, assumes a conservative estimate of turnover costs at $15,000 per employee, where the average turnover in Australia is around 15%. And furthermore, InSync surveys report that 80% of this turnover is preventable. Now, Gallup completed the largest global study of engagement and team performance. They surveyed 2.7 million employees in 112,000 business units and teams in 96 countries. And look at the results. Here we compare the levels of engagement against some key criteria. Gallup compared the difference in outcomes from the bottom quartile of engagement with those in the top quartile of engagement. And look at the differences between these bottom and top quartiles for criteria like absenteeism, a difference of 81%. That's 81% more likely that the bottom quartile will take time away from work than the top quartile of engaged employees. 64% likely to have more accidents. Employees' well-being will be 66% better in engaged employees. And the businesses will be 23% more profitable if their employees are in the top quartile of engagement over the bottom quartile. That's real money. I've just covered a lot of statistics and numbers, but in summary, let me conclude this. If you do not have role clarity, you will have increased stress at your workplace. If you do have role clarity, then you will have more engaged employees that will produce higher productivity, increased profits, and greater employee well-being. Surely these reports by credible authorities about the factors that are impacted by role clarity should be the kicker every organisation needs. I don't know what more proof is required. Now, I won't say that clarifying roles is a simple step, but it is an achievable step and a vitally important one. If you want less stress, more productive and engaged employees, less turnover, lower operating costs, less risk, and less potential fines and penalties, to me, it's a no-brainer. And I'm sure that everyone present here today would also acknowledge this. We're all very busy, but aren't we too busy to complete something as fundamental as ensuring all employees know what is expected of them? I believe the real reason is people don't know how. Because if you already knew how to obtain real role clarity, then you and every organisation would already be doing it. It's just something in which you don't yet know how. And please don't take that as a criticism, take it as an opportunity. We are all human, no one is perfect. There are many things that I don't yet know in many areas, but if it is impacting me, then I'm going to find out. The difficulty is that there are so many consultants out there and they, like us, all claim to be specialists. How do you sort the ones who really know versus the ones who have a more superficial understanding? I think a large part of this problem is that many consultants specialise in a specific sector or market niche. And when they do, they often focus on a specific symptom. And this is often at the request of the client. And sure, this narrow focus can make an improvement, but often it is not sustainable across the organisation. And at worst, it will cause another problem, a different problem or symptom to pop up elsewhere, often months later. The specialists at our workplace look for the root cause of the problem and address that from the perspective of 12 different disciplines. The problem for us is, and also for some of you, I'm sure, is that it is not always the quick fix that companies seek. As I said earlier, I'm not the specialist in this area. I'm not one of the global specialists who have PhD credentials in leadership and organisational change, or has lectured in 6 universities, both nationally and internationally, has been an organisational troubleshooter in 14 countries. But I have studied under such a person, and I have used this information and this knowledge to greatly improve the businesses I have managed in both my previous corporate career and more recently as a consultant. I know there is no quick fix, but rather a journey of continual improvement, and getting those organisational foundations right is critical. To the degree your organisation does not have its house in order is the degree your organisation is exposed to risk. Because once those foundations are firmly established, then everything else you put on top has a better chance of sticking, of being effective. So I'm not against the many good initiatives that so many consultants promote in their area of speciality. In fact, I support them. I just believe it is the wrong starting point for most businesses. And that starting point is around these key issues. And without labouring this, a key item here is role clarity. It's one of those foundation pillars. Role clarity is the operational tool that captures the necessary compliance to many of these internal systems, policies, values, standards, awards, etc. It's like an umbrella over the organisation, and when done properly, it is the first of some key systems that keep the organisation safe. And unless you have built in strong organisation foundations, then anything else you build on top in your organisation won't be stable, won't be sustainable. Sure, it might work for a little time, like a band-aid on a sore, but when your organisation gets stressed, the foundations will no longer hold the structure and cracks will open up. So after you strengthen the organisational foundations, the next obvious step is to focus on how work is performed. Focus on the people who perform that work and to provide them with a stable platform to make it safe for them and to engage and motivate them and manage their performance fairly. Without that solid structure in place, with the guidance systems being used daily, we can never reach a sustainable, productive organisation that is capable of predicting and reacting to external environmental challenges. We cannot achieve a truly resilient business which is future-proofed against anything that can be thrown at us. Now, I find it interesting, the recent focus on diversity. Diversity is a bit like culture. It is what you see or experience as an outcome of the daily actions and decisions and behaviours that happen in the workplace. This focus on diversity at the expense of other actions and behaviours puts things out of balance. In solving one problem, it creates another. Now, as an example, I'm very supportive of more women in the workplace, more diversity on all fronts. But look at it this way. An operational position description is all about the work expectation and not about the individual. Unless this happens, there can never be true equality in the workplace. Unless personal traits and personalities are removed from any expectation of what work is required, there will be an opportunity for biases and personal preferences to prevail. And this will enhance any misgivings on trust, respect, and fairness. So if you want to achieve diversity in your workplace, focus on getting role clarity, and diversity will follow naturally, not by some artificial statistic which must be met. If you're honest about your recruiting processes, removing any personal biases or I like you because you are like me sort of thing, then you will not only get the best person for the job, but diversity will naturally follow. It will not matter whether the employee is black, white or brindle. It will not matter whether they are gay or of a particular religious persuasion, so long as they are meeting the expectations of the job. And I often hear shouts of, yes, but they must meet the values of the organisation. Correct, which is why we have responsibilities on the team member or organisational side of each role and separated from the technical or production responsibilities. So let me just summarise again the benefits of role clarity. It sets working expectations and parameters. It provides for flexibility and innovation within guidelines that match the purpose of the business. It builds in compliance rather than compliance being treated as an add-on. It is fair and just for people, for both the employees and their leaders. It will plug holes in an organisation that the organisation didn't even know existed. And it dictates future actions to prevent falling into a hole in the future. And you will have a less stressful workplace. You see, an organisation is an entity in its own right. It needs to exist before and after people leave their roles. The CEO and the executive team are caretakers and should leave the organisation in a better position than when they started. They should put in the structure and systems that will protect the organisation and help everyone achieve whatever their role is, so that the needs of the organisation are met, the needs of the employees are met, and that governance is met. So today, I have covered why roles are part of the organisation's structure, what happens when roles are meshed with human attributes, how operational position descriptions will de-stress your company and greatly reduce risk and wasted money, and also what you can do to create true role clarity in your organisation. So thank you for your attention, and I will open up the panel for any questions or points of view in relation to the theme of role clarity and what that may mean for improving overall business performance. I'll hand over to our MC to facilitate the Q&A.
Thanks very much for that, Garth. That was awesome. So who has questions for Garth? Garth, I'm interested, how do you measure organisational aspects such as teamwork or good communication?
Well, gee, that's a great question, Kevin, because there's so many of the organisational matters that we deal with that, like that spider's web, are all interrelated. And therefore, to do one thing and try and equate a measurable business performance, which we invariably bring back to something like profit or revenue or sales or something like that, is quite difficult for one particular organisational thing that you're focused on. They all interact. What I know from my experience is that some of the success that I've had, I couldn't say that some of these things produced that success, but I can say that without those organisational systems, I could not have got that success. And just like a university can't guarantee any use of the knowledge that they impart, neither can we with this organisational knowledge. But that knowledge, if applied and used daily in the workplace, will give a stepped improvement. How you actually measure that is difficult. There are ways that people try, like employee feedback solutions and these sorts of things, but that's not an exact science either.
Thanks, man.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Garth, and this comes out of some of my IT clients who are moving heavily into Agile, and whatever the hell that means. Everything from Spotify Agile to some pretty watered down versions. But for example, my wife works at one of the big 4 banks, and she was talking about this her frustration at swarming. And I said, what the hell is swarming? She said, oh, well, when there's a customer need, everyone who wants to swarms in and solves the problem. And I was like, really? That's a very different model to a very traditional, here's the purpose, what are the roles we need to deliver? And so how do you reconcile that new organisational form with the sort of organisational form you're talking about, or do you see them as different at all?
I don't want to be derogatory to these sort of things, because every one of these things is useful in its own right. But one of the issues that we struggle with is that until you have some of the fundamentals in your organisation, those foundations established, all these other initiatives that people introduce don't have something solid to sit on. So they're treated as something in isolation. And when you do that, it is not sustainable. And like I said earlier, it can enable other problems to pop up, because you're not looking holistically, you're looking at one little targeted area. And that is one of the fundamental issues that we have about these type of approaches. But each one of those approaches has values in their own right.
Garth, I've got a question.
Yes, Graham.
Do you start by writing a PD for the business, which lists out the functions and the tasks, and then do you break that down by team, and then do you break it down by individual, or do you start from the bottom up? How would you do it?
Well, the absolute starting point is getting the purpose of the organisation right. And I've got to say that a lot of organisations don't have a clearly defined purpose. They muddle that up to start with. So it's difficult to start on the purpose for each department or section or team or individual and have them all in alignment without starting at the top. But sometimes, being pragmatic, we can't do that. We've got to start at the bottom and try and work back up. But it is an iterative process going up and down, and no matter how good you are, invariably it's very difficult to get a position description written correctly the first time. It's not like writing a letter where it just flows and there it is. It is a complex process, and because when it's done properly, everything needs to be in alignment. The purpose, the end product, and the responsibilities from an individual into a team, to a section, department, division, or however the organisation is structured, right up to the whole organisation. Everything has to be in alignment, because as soon as you get out of alignment, your flow of work through the organisation is interrupted. And I say this is starting to get into an organisational design discussion, and they are somewhat related.
Mm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. An excellent presentation, by the way. Felt
Thank
like we're in the hands of a real expert.
Thank you. I'm just guided by the real specialist.
Thanks for the presentation. I've got a question probably related to Grant's question. So who actually writes the PD? So I've worked with OD people in the past where we've had, look, the managers need to write them, or alternatively, no, let's get the people in similar roles. Let's actually, draft some PDs and then trash it out. So what's your view on that? Who's best equipped to write the PD?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really get me up on my hobby horse. One thing that's absolutely not the way to go is get the individuals to write their PD, because they will write it from their own individual perspective. What the organisation needs can differ from what an individual might want to do rather than what they need to do in that role. Very fundamental difference there. So that's why I said a position is created because the organisation needs some goods or services produced. Whoever is defining that needs to write or have the input to the position description. A specialist might write it, but in our program, what we try and do, instead of coming in as a consultant and doing everything for the organisation and then walking out with all that corporate knowledge, and then the next time a job is created with the organisation, they don't know how to do it. What we're trying to do is impart the skills and the processes and the systems needed, the understanding, the knowledge that's needed to write a position description, we're trying to impart that to the organisation, but never to the individual who's doing the job, because it invariably will be taken off course.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, that's about all the time that we have. Thank you so much, Garth. That was fantastic. If anyone wants any more information, just hit Garth up for a one-to-one and have a conversation with him. I'm sure he'd be up for that. So thank you very much. Can we all thank Garth for that? I thought it was awesome.
Thank you.